This is going to be a career-spanning conversation. We will involve you towards the end of it. Jerzy, let's go. Shall we go right back to... There's been a question mark about your date of birth. I think it is actually 5th of May 1938, isn't it? But it was 1936 for a time. Isn't there? There's a story behind that, isn't there?
I never talk about that, I must say. It's a mysterious story, but so maybe we should leave it as it is, a mystery.
Right, okay, let's...
The family story is that my mother was cheating a little bit with my birth date, because I was in such a terrible condition after the war, since I spent the war in the orphanage. My father, who was deeply involved in the Polish resistance, was eventually caught by the Nazis and sent to the concentration camp, and he was gassed in the German concentration camp of Flossenburg. But my mother took his position in that in what he was doing, and therefore I had to be sent into the orphanage. Nobody was there to take care about my children years. So the orphanage was, of course, in a terrible condition. There was no food, no. So eventually, when the war ended, there was an action of Red Cross that 500 children from Poland would be sent to Switzerland. And the criterion on which they supposed to be chosen was the most terrible state of health. And in that competition, I was very strong because I think I went through all the possible illnesses, including the zapalenie opon mózgowych. Is there anybody who knows Polish? How is zapalenie opon mózgowych?
Meningitis.
Meningitis. So, it must have some effect on my brain as well. And the only criterion which I didn't really fulfill in that competition to become one of the 500 was my age. I think I was either 2 years too old or too young. So my mother had a little idea she scrapped. I think she changed 6 to 8 or 8 to 6, whatever it was, and she managed to include me in those 500. So suddenly in 1946, I spent 6 months in Adelboden, the beautiful Swiss village somewhere near Zurich. And for the first time in my life, I recognized the taste of chocolate, of many other things as well. So that's the story, and so far no one really got into the checking the the real date. So let's leave it as it is.
And then after the war, your mother ended up at the Polish embassy in Prague, wasn't it? And then you went to a boarding school with some rather distinguished fellow pupils.
Yes, since my mother was a figure of yes, she was a kind of activist, you know, not only in the resistance, but also in the Polish education. So she was running the secret school. I don't know if I would have the words for it, because I really never talk about it, but I remember when I had some rare moments when I was in so-called home in some apartment in Warsaw, where I had my little bed, maybe of that size, with a kind of
railings.
Railings, yes. And I remember Gestapo banging into our front door with the kolba, with the other side of the carabine. Here is the and this
Rifle butts.
they were banging, and so eventually my mother opened, they entered like this, and I was taught that if such an occasion occurred, that I have to play a happy child. So I was standing on my bed and kind of jumping up and down, smiling, and the Gestapo, after quick search was going on in this apartment, I received a cookie or something like this from the man with a helmet and terrible green uniform. Yes, the green of those uniforms is the worst color. Since I am a painter, you know, I have a special attitude towards colors, and honestly, this is the worst color. It's called Prussian green, you know, quite correct name for it. It's like a poison. So, no, but I mentioned this apartment in Warsaw not only for that scene with Gestapo in the night. Oh, and I forgot the most important. Under that bed was the printing machine, which my parents used to produce the bulletin, which was distributed, you know, among people, to let them know what's really going on in the world, that London is helping, and that you know was the situation on the Eastern Front and the Western Front, whatever. So, because I was doing my act, they never look under the bed, so they never found this bulletin printer. And another episode from those days in Warsaw, that my mother, when she ran that secret schooling, was receiving like a dozen of young people pretending that they are being taught
Sewing.
to become
Sewing. Seamstresses, yes?
seamstresses, you know. So there were on the table, there were some clothes, you know, of course, the scissors and the thread, whatever. And those young people have only one little page to take the notes, because eventually, if Gestapo would enter it, they have to quickly put it into their mouth and swallow it, because of course that was completely illegal, and everything which was illegal was punished by death, an immediate death. They would be taken down into the street and shot. Okay, so after the war, my mother was recognized as one of those brave people who were really doing good things during the war, and she was promoted to become a culture attaché of the Polish embassy in Prague. So on my return from Switzerland in '46, I then returned to Warsaw. I returned to Prague, and that was completely different thing. And my mother was able to send me into the best school of this area of Europe. It was in the castle of Podiebrady, which was 53 kilometers from Prague, a 16th century castle of the King George of Podiebrady. And that was the school for the boys only. It was about 100 of us, and we were we had like 10 dormitories. In every dormitory was about 8, 9, 10, 11 boys. In my dormitory, I think there were 8 of us, but the oldest of us, who was the boss, was Milos Forman, and he had a habit of slapping our faces, which in Czech, they have a little bit different attitude towards slapping face. It's a kind of normal thing. They say, I'm going to give you parfacek, like this. So I received those, and on the next bed to me was another receiver of those parfacek, who was Ivan Passer, another filmmaker. It's strange that out of 8 occupants of that very dormitory on the 4th floor of the castle, 3 of them become the filmmakers. But even more bizarre is that in the school, I share the desk, you know, the double desk, with Václav Havel, who later on became a writer and the president of the Czech Republic. We collaborate quite well with Václav. I was making drawings for him, and he was doing my Latin and Greek. But meantime, the political system in Czech Republic started to change. It became more and more and more influenced by Moscow, and eventually communists took the power, and that was during my second year in that school. And we knew that something's going to happen with the school because it was a little bit too aristocratic, too much of an English way of educating young people. So the communist Minister of Education got a brilliant idea how to destroy that school. They forced the school would accept a girl, because there was one other dormitory which was unoccupied. It was in the tower of the castle, high up there. We were on the fourth floor. The other dormitories were on the third floor, second floor. So they accepted the girl. I remember her name. I will remember it to my last days. Her name already sounded sexy, and she was billed to get all the boys in the school crazy, really, you know. She was, if you remember Jane Mansfield, so it was a 16-year-old copy of Jane Mansfield named Lily Stoklasova. So Lily got us crazy, and the film and the school wasn't same anymore.
So then I believe you went back to Warsaw, where you discovered things like jazz and boxing.
Eventually, I was expelled from the school. And it's a long story, so I'll avoid that. But eventually, yes, I returned to Poland, and there were another bizarre circumstances, because when my mother was sent to that post of being culture attaché in the Polish embassy, she had to leave our little room, which we occupied after the war. Our apartment didn't exist. It was destroyed by the bomb or something. So we had a little room, and since she had to go abroad, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, which was the boss of my mother at that time, took away that little room and gave it to somebody else. So all our belongings were packed in some crate and kept in the foreign ministry. And on our return, we didn't have a place to live. So they were trying to find some place, and my mother didn't like this and that. And so eventually they put us into hotel room. And for some surrealistic reason, they have chosen the most elegant hotel in Warsaw, Hotel Bristol. And when I was graduating from the high school, I lived in the Hotel Bristol, which caused some nervous situations when I wasn't really a best pupil, yes, and many times it was I was told, Skolimowski, you have to bring your mother to the school. And so I was saying, well, my mother is busy because she's actually teaching, whatever. But when it comes to the information, where do you live, Skolimowski? And I was saying Hotel Bristol, they thought that I am making a bad joke, you know. So I was punished even for that, you know, and for many other reasons as well. And that was the time when, for some reasons, my colleagues somehow have chosen me as a, how would I say, not as an enemy, no, but somebody who is a little bit off or, you know, out of the group. And I got beaten many times. So in order to defend myself, I became a member of the boxing club, and I start to really train boxing. And I've done it for several months, and I start to have real fights. Of course, amateur fights, you know, that far from the what you see on the television screen. It was amateur fights, but still it was 3 rounds, 3 minutes each of them. I was fighting in the weight which was called welter, which is 67 kilograms. So with my height of 5 feet 10 inches, I was rather tall. I had long arms, so I kept my opponents in the distance, you know, jab, jab, jab. And I had all together over 10 regular fights. I lost nearly half of them, but still, you know, I had some success and also some skills. So no longer I was an object to beat, because I learned how to fight back. And I found it quite useful in life later on, not by attacking somebody, but by one thing. You know, when you are in the boxing ring, you're facing your opponent, and you know that any second, you know, the punch will be coming your way. And when you see that punch approaching your face, you don't close your eyes. Because if you close your eyes, then you're gone, because then you don't know what is happening in the next second. And in the next second may be coming the real blow which would knock you out. So you cannot close your eyes. You have to face the worst with the open eyes to be able to go, you know, sideways or, you know, or somehow defend yourself. And that was very useful. So physically and metaphorically, I don't close my eyes when the danger is coming. It was very useful when, for example, I was running with my car with a high speed, and suddenly I faced the Bundeswehr tank, you know, blocking the whole way. And there was no escape, because it was on the narrow, curvy mountain road. And there was, on one side, it was przepaść.
Precipice.
a
Precipice.
recipe, and on the other side was a wall. So I couldn't do anything except, braking and złamać kierownicę.
Break the wheel.
And breaking my steering wheel. The impact was so strong that my wedding ring was taken off and it was found under the gąsienica.
I don't know.
How is gąsienica czołgu? It must have a name in English. The tank doesn't have the wheels. It has this.
Caterpillar tracks.
Yes.
What?
Caterpillar trucks.
Caterpillar
Tracks.
Czech. Okay. So my wedding ring was found there under this. I was taken by the back. I was taken out of this car, which was completely smashed, by the back window, and the Bundeswehr helicopter landed, and they took me into the German military hospital, and they gave me a special injection because they were afraid that I may got, and here is the real word which I hope that you find, tężec. How is tężec?
Tetanus.
What?
Tetanus.
Say it again.
Tetanus.
Yes. So they gave me such a injection, and my neck got swollen like this. That my neck was wider than my ears. But why am I telling you all that?
I wonder.
Just to explain why I behave so strangely, yes? Now you know.
Right. Well, I think we should probably jump ahead a bit because so far we haven't mentioned, apart from the future Czech filmmakers, we haven't really mentioned films at all. Because am I right in thinking you had no real interest in the cinema until the late 1950s, and then there was a chance encounter?
That's correct, yes. But I was very ambitious and trying to become somebody. So I was trying to write a poetry. Terrible poetry, terrible. Still, I published two books of poems. But later on, since I had a chance to travel around Poland, I was always able to go in certain town where we actually stopped, to go to the public library, and I was stealing my own books, and I hope that there is no single evidence of that kind of my activity, because at that time I was already involved very much in jazz. The year was 1956, I guess, and the playing jazz was kind of illegal activity under the communist regime, because it was so-called American music, and we were behind the Iron Curtain. So any influence of any culture influence from the Western world was zakazane. Forbidden. So playing jazz was a little bit risky, but we liked it so much that we were forming a kind of secret group of people who were involved in jazz, and I was among them. Another person whom I met in those years, being in the same situation, and I was Roman Polanski. So we know each other from 1956. And I especially like the group of Christopher Komeda because they were playing a really modern jazz. I would say that it was close to maybe Dave Brubeck quartet, this kind of music it was. And I really tried to be as close as possible to them. So I started to learn to play drums, thinking that maybe if I develop my skills, maybe one day I could play with them. And I was a lousy drummer as well. Eventually, in the silly circumstances where we were playing in the medical club in Warsaw on Oczki Street, the drummer had some stomach pain and was signaling me, and I was on outside of the stage, but looking, you know, at them. He was signaling that I should replace him at least for a moment so he would be able to go to the toilet. So we made this quick exchange, and for the first time in my life, I had the, how you call it, pałeczki?
Sticks?
Sticks, yes. So I was able to do some tremolando, you know, but I couldn't keep the rhythm. So the boss of the group were coming in front of me and tupać.
Stump.
And stamped, you know, in the rhythm to help me. But eventually the drummer returned from the toilet and I was relieved from my attempt to become a drummer. So, as you see, I was trying to be a poet, I was trying to be a drummer, I was trying to be a boxer, but all those things were not terribly successful. So I start to look around what's left then for me. And I found film. And thank God film somehow embraced me. And here I am now.
Right, I think we should probably jump ahead a bit to, shall we tell the story about Riss or Piss, although it's been told a million times, but it's such a good one, I think we have it.
When I entered the film school, I had a perspective of spending 4 years in the film school. Then I would graduate. I would become a third assistant of some director, and if I would be lucky, a year later, I would become a second assistant of some other director. And after another 5 or 7 or 10 or 12 or 15 years, or maybe never, I would have a chance to make my own film. And that perspective wasn't very much into my character. So I thought, how can I avoid spending such a long time? Because of course I wanted to make a film, but the way into for the opportunity to do that was too long. I couldn't wait 15 or maybe even longer years eventually to make film. So I thought, okay, let me see. On the first year, and remember that was the time when we shot on the stock, not on the video. There was no video yet. So every single piece of film was shot on the film stock. And that was the most expensive part of running the film school. So the stock was very limited. So every student had a chance of using 2 minutes of the stock during the first year of studying. On the second year, it was already 6 or 7 minutes because it was kind of already a little film. On the third year, it was even more, and eventually for diploma, the student got like maybe 20-something minute. So I calculated, if I put 2 and 7 and 12 and 18 together, it could be nearly a feature film. But to make a feature film, I would have to have an actor who would be on hand anytime, whenever I would have the opportunity to get hold of the camera and little piece of stock, whenever it was the opportunity of exercise with the student of the cinematography faculty to have a little exercise of 1 minute of using the zoom lens, for example. So I have to have an actor who would be always in the same costume, always with the same haircut. So I had to be my own actor. There was no other choice. And I made this film. I put all those minutes together. Remember that, of course, I couldn't have the second take. It was always one take only, to use every inch of the tape available. And eventually, when I show my diploma to the ensemble of the professors of the film school, and there were the best names of the Polish cinema, of course. And they were locked in the school's screening room, and I was there present in the projection booth, looking through the small window how it's going, and giving the notice to the projectionist, saying, "Hey, listen, in 1 minute you will change the reel. Come on, in 40 seconds, 30 seconds, 20 seconds. Okay, get ready. Now, change the reel." So the screening went smoothly, and after 71 minutes, because that was the length of my film, the screening ended. The light went on in the screening room, and I was still watching what's going on there. And they were all sitting like this. Nobody moved, nobody talked for a solid minute, maybe even a bit longer. And then suddenly the head of the school, whose name was Jerzy Teplitz, he was famous film historian. He published several volumes of the film history. Suddenly he got up, went to the door, opened the door, and screamed, "Skolimowski, come here." They knew that I am over there, because always the student was there watching what's going on. So I went down into the room. I enter, they all got up, and this head of the school extend his hand towards me, saying, "Welcome, colleague." In Polish it sounds, "Witamy, kolegę." So it was like in old times when somebody was giving the saber on the arm, saying, you're from now on,
You're one of us.
yes, you're one of us. And therefore, the same year, I got the chance to make my real first professional film with a decent budget. But still, I kept acting in it because I thought that if I prolong that story about that character, it would make sense. Eventually, I made a trilogy.
Shall we? Because we actually have a clip from Walkover.
Oh, you have a clip?
Yes, which is it's just 29 shots, isn't it? Because I know you do very, very, very long takes. And what I've picked is a clip that actually features one continuous shot, and I like this one because everything, the mood changes partway through, including the lighting. It's a really, really technically impressive piece of work, and of course, Jerzy is very much centre stage. So can we have the clip from Walkover, please?
No to do widzenia, panie Rogala.
Do jutra.
Jeszcze nie zwariowałem. Załatwi mnie pierwszym ciosem. O 10 mam pociąg, zaraz jadę.
Tu już nikogo nie ma, wszyscy wyszli.
To pogaś tam światła, Wielgosz.
Mogę zgasić, fakt.
To się pospiesz, bo się już spóźniłeś.
To pojadę rano. Nie zwariowałem, żeby dać się zabić. Pan sobie gdzie indziej szuka frajerów, panie Rogala.
To nie ja cię szukam. Jak jest gdzieś pierwszy krok, to i ty jesteś. I się spotykamy. Musimy się już przestać spotykać.
No to dancing mamy z głowy.
Dlaczego?
Okropnie to wygląda.
Może jeszcze mamy teraz jakiś pociąg, co?
Przecież wygrałeś. Jutro finał.
Daj spokój.
Mówiłeś, że to taki piękny dźwięk, taki mobilizujący.
Mówi się wiele rzeczy.
Że walkover to zawsze walkover. A wiesz, ludzie mówili, że się oszczędzasz na jutro.
Co mnie obchodzi, co mówili ludzie?
Obchodzi cię. Głównie to cię obchodzi. Potem długo, długo nic. Potem w ogóle nic.
Wiesz? Ja zawsze miałem kłopoty ze wstawaniem. To już potem po boksie, po wojsku, prosiłem matkę, żeby mnie budziła wyliczając, jak sędzia na ringu. 1, 2, 3. I wyrobiłem sobie taki odruch, że wstawałem, zanim matka doliczy do 10.
No to co?
Nic.
Shall we jump ahead? Because you then made Barrier, which is absolutely extraordinary film that we're showing next week. And then Hands Up. Well, there was Le Départ, your French New Wave, or Belgian. But then you got into trouble with Hands Up, which sort of closed the first phase of your career.
Well, the Hands Up was the third part of that trilogy I mentioned to you. The same character several years later as a student of medical university unfortunately, I got into politics because at that time, actually, everybody was involved. You know, the communist era didn't really stopped with so-called the tide, Odvilj. So it was a gradual process of letting a little bit more of freedom freedom in culture, especially. We were able to play jazz legally, at least, but it was still a very gradual, very slow process, and people were trying to speed up that process. You know, that was the kind of social need of allowing ourselves to be really free. And I made this anti-Stalinist film called Hands Up, where there is a famous scene with a huge billboard with Stalin's face and 4 eyes of Stalin. And the film was quite avant-garde for the time and rather good. And I remember that Mr. Renzi, who was the head of the Venice Film Festival, came to Poland to have to choose the film, the Polish film, for the festival, and he had chosen Hands Up. And I thought that, okay, here I am doing something really important. I am almost proclaiming a manifesto of the Polish society of that time, that we would like to cut ourselves from the Russian influence that those shades of Stalinism who are very present in our life should be dismissed. And suddenly I got news that the film was withdrawn from Venice and put on the shelves, as they call it, that this film will never be screened on the Polish screens for political reason. Apparently, the Russian ambassador in Poland had seen this film somewhere in some secret screening and demanded that the scene with the 4-eyed Stalin will be cut out of the film. And when I was informed about that, I said, no way, no, the film, this is the key scene and it has to stay. So eventually, I tried to intervene in the head of the Ministry of Culture, and no way. So I got an appointment with the man number 2 in the Communist Party. His name was Kliszko. The number 1 was Gomułka. And Gomułka, I didn't have any chance to get to meet. So I went at 8 o'clock in the morning one day into the Communist Party building to meet Mr. Kliszko. And I went there, and the secretary told me, you have 5 minutes. She opened the door, she let me in, and knowing that I have 5 minutes only, I start to talk immediately, standing at the doorway. And I talk as fast as I could, and you probably noticed that I stutter, so it was really a desperate act to really to throw to that man with all the passion and believe that this is the right thing, that we should really show to the world, or at least to show in the Venice Film Festival, that we are an independent country, that we are not under the shadow of our big brother from Moscow. You know, it was a naive action, of course, but still, because I had this need to fight for the film, I play a fool in front of this guy. And literally, maybe he was looking at his watch. At the 5th minute, he got up, and I was saying my last argument, which I declare, look, if you don't let this film to be screened, that I don't see myself making any other film in Poland, because I am not going to make a romantic comedy or a gangster movie or something like this. I am interested in making films like this. And he was already up, a very cynical, completely without any expression face. He said 2 words. How would you translate it? He said, szerokiej drogi.
Bon voyage.
Well, something like that, bon voyage, yes. And the next morning, they brought me my passport to my home. You know, we always were fighting to get the passport to be able to leave the country in any moment, and it was always a desperate fight because they kept the passports in the locker of the Ministry of Interior Affairs. But they brought me the passport. So it was a kind of delicate suggestion that I should leave the country. So I left, not knowing any language, not knowing any people abroad.
And then, of course, you spent many years here, where you made several of your best films. And in fact, the second clip is from one of the best of them, which is Deep End. I think we'll launch straight into that clip now.
Yes, sir, can I help you?
It's all right, I've already talked to the manager.
Oh, great, it's these. Did you read about these? Can I have one to put in my room?
Yes, of course.
Oh, thanks, great. Oh, fantastic. Do you see it in the paper? Hmm?
What does it say?
It's that thing from the Family Planning Association, the pregnant man. I think it's a good idea.
Stupid.
Gives you quite a shock, doesn't
It's
it?
completely stupid.
Cheerio.
Bye-bye.
Why is it stupid?
Because a man can never get pregnant.
That's hardly the point. The point is it's a shock. It makes you look at it and then you think about, perhaps I ought to think about...
About what? The whole
Using
thing's stupid.
contraceptives.
How can a man ever be like that? You can tell, look, you can
Come
see
here.
if you
Come
look.
here, I have an
It's
idea.
just...
Come here.
No, wait, you can see it's just a cushion that they put...
Shut up.
What?
Sit down. Up. Put your feet up here. Here you go.
What?
Put your feet up. Lie back. Oh, just relax. There. Just relax. Just relax. Just
Susan,
lie down. There.
Susan, it's filthy
See?
poster.
Fantastic. You can
You'd
be
be carrying it around with it. Susan, stop it. Susan.
Oh, wait a minute. I've got a better. This is better.
Isn't a customer, please?
Hey, stop it. I'll be arrested for defacing government property or something. Wait a minute. Defacing. Go ahead. Lie down. Oh, that's fantastic. That's
Really
great.
good.
Yeah, it's really good. It's very good. Yeah, sit down.
Okay.
You feel like kicking?
What?
The baby,
Oh.
silly. It's very good. Stand up. Stand here. Would you be more careful if it was you that got pregnant?
What?
Would you be more careful if it was you that got pregnant? Right.
I can't be more careful than I am at the moment.
What do you mean?
I just turned 16 when I saw that, possibly in this very auditorium, certainly in this building. Traumatised me for life, clearly. Although I went on to marry a slightly older redhead called Jane, which I only realised the other day, which is curious. Anyway, yes.
Working with Jane Asher was a phenomenal experience. You know, she was one of the most prominent people of those days, very close to Beatles, brilliant, intelligent, great actress. Defacing government property was, of course, her line, her improvisation, and she was helping with things like this during the production. Yes, that was a good experience. We were creating a happy group of people who were devoted to filmmaking. We were ambitious. We were rather brave, you know, because we were taking enormous risks. We were actually shooting London in Germany. We were shooting 3/4 of the film in Munich studio. That was the set, which was arranged by brilliant British set designer Tony Pratt. Thank you, Tony, wherever you are, if you still are with us. And the script was partially improvised, as I already told you. Jane was, of course, an experienced actress, but the boy, John Moulter Brown, that was only his second part. He wasn't very experienced. But most of the supporting parts were played by Germans, pretending that they are Londoners. We had some problems with accent, obviously. But of course they were eventually dubbed in London. So it looks very British, I must say.
Well, jumping ahead, because you had another very happy experience on The Shout, which we're showing later tonight. And we actually have a short interview with the producer, Jeremy Thomas, which will set the scene nicely. So can we have that?
The Shout was an incredible short story by Robert Graves, which my friend Michael Austin had made into a script. And when I returned from Australia from doing Mad Dog, I had this wonderful script, and I wanted to think about how I could make it unusual. And I was a big fan of Jerzy Skolimowski, and I'd seen Deep End and knew that he had been involved with the writing of Knife in the Water and his other films in this sort of avant-garde period, which had been in festivals and very, very sort of highly regarded. And I arranged to meet him, and I met him at the Hilton Hotel in London, in the Park Lane. And immediately got on incredibly well. And he said, I want to do this film because I want to shoot a cricket match. And so that was the beginning of our journey, which obviously would involve normal work on the script, finding the wonderful locations in Devon where we shot it, and mainly finding this incredible cast, which everybody wanted to work with Jerzy. I understood something. It was the beginning of my journey, that artists like to work with unusual artists, and we managed to find a cast for that film which sounds unbelievable today for a little film. Alan Bates, John Hurt, Susanna York, Tim Curry, Robert Stevens, Jim Broadbent. It was, you know, an extraordinary cast in this little film who all came with joy, and we had a very, very happy time working in Devon, making this film all on location, staying in a hotel together. It was so enjoyable. It was such an enjoyable, and I saw a new side of filmmaking, which was a different style of the sort of very quite constrained way that films were made, that I'd been seen being made, into being a film which was made with a sort of an inspirational, artistic flavour to it, which, of course, was something which was in all of Jerzy's films.
Now, of course, we're showing The Shout later tonight, and you'll be introducing that at the time. So I think we'll jump ahead to Moonlighting, which another absolutely extraordinary film. I think one of your best, and one of the fastest films you ever made, wasn't it? I think it went from inspiration to Cannes premiere in something like 5 months.
Well, the inspiration was the real historical event, you know. And that was the time when I lived in London. I had a little house in Kensington, in De Vere Gardens, close to Kensington Gardens. It was called Coach House, you know, those tiny, narrow houses next to each other. Probably the least expensive in that area, of course, the least expensive. But that's what I could have afforded at that time. So I lived there, and I used to have the Times that delivered every morning into my door. And I woke up, I went down, opened the door, got the Times, and the headline on the front page said, "Martial law declared in Poland." So I didn't want my family to see it, and I went a little walk to the Kensington Gardens, just 2 minutes walk. But when I reached the corner, and there was a hotel on the corner, a little hotel, I have seen the group of people standing in front of the hotel with their luggages next to them put on the pavement, and I recognized that they speak Polish. So I slowed down, I listened for a while what's going on, and I quickly recognized that those are the people, a group of people, like maybe 25 of them, different ages, and even with some children. And that was a group which visited London for a few days as a group, because the Polish travel companies organized at that time. The year is 1972.
1981, Jerzy. 1981.
Sorry, 1981. 1981, correct, yes. And the Polish travel agencies organized such a travels, you know, like 4 days in London, in the luxurious hotel, whatever. And that very group, that was their last day, so they were simply thrown out of the hotel because the travel agency just paid for that very last night, and they were And they already knew that there is no way of traveling back to Poland, because the martial law, you know, all the planes were stopped, and they have to somehow deal with the situation. So they were rather desperate, nervous. So instead of going to the Kensington Garden, I approached them and I said, I believe I recognize the situation which you found yourself in right now, but I have a place here 2 minutes from here. So please come for tea and maybe we can together find some solution. So that's what had happened. I made the tea for 25 people. And you know, someone of them said, "Oh, I know. Maybe I have a friend who lives in Wimbledon. Maybe can I use your phone? Can I call?" So of course, I let them use my phone. That person called the friend in Wimbledon, and after a short conversation, she was accepted to be the guest of the friend in Wimbledon. And that created the pattern. So I start to call my friends, and I was asking, look, here is such a situation. Can you accept maybe one, maybe two people for a lodging for some possibly short time, but you never know. And this way I distributed more than half of them. And then I ran out of my friends. So I opened the telephone directory of London. I don't know if they still exist, such a, you know, several books like, you know. And I thought, where will I find the Polacks? Well, of course, on the letter S if it is followed by Z. So I got that very volume and I start, you know, Szczepański, Szczypiorniak, Szczerbic, and I called them. And I said the same thing, you know, I have a group, here I am, I introduced myself. Some of them heard about me, they knew whom I am. And I was explaining that I have that group of people here and I am trying to find the places for them. So when I distribute this way, all of them except one, the last guy, and I said, look, and I asked, what's your name? He said, Gienio Haczkiewicz. So I said, Mr. Haczkiewicz, go upstairs on the fourth floor, there is a little room, and it's yours. Go over there. So I got Gienio, and of course he was anxious to know what is happening in Poland. So whenever he heard that I opened the TV set and there are some news, he was running down to look at the TV set and waiting for the news from Poland. So there were some news, and he was asking, he didn't know any English, so he was asking me, so please tell me what was happening. And when they were saying that there are some victims, you know, that the militia shot some people in Kopalnia Wujek, in the Wujek mines, which was the historical fact. I didn't want to upset him even more than he was, and I translated a softer version of what is really happening. And once I did that, and it was repeatedly, you know, several times of each day, I found myself doing something which I immediately recognized that this is a material for the movie. You know, the interpreting the truth into a softer truth. So once I got the idea that it could be a material for the film, I invited 4 of my friends who had skills. Somehow, one was the quite well-known director of photography. Another guy was my editor of Depend. His name was Barry Vince. And it was another person. I put them on different floors, and I was running from one floor to the other, dictating the scene which I had in mind to that very person, and then changing the floors and dictating some other scene. And that method gave me, after 3 days, I had a pile of pages which eventually become the film. But I immediately went, with those pages, I went to Channel 4, and I spoke to the boss, saying, here, I have an idea about making the movie such and such and such. Here are some pages, you can have a look. And again, I was talking. And to my surprise, this boss of Channel 4 went somewhere, spoke to his colleagues, and returned to me and said, yes, we are interested, and perhaps we can cover the half of your budget. But you should have somebody with a name to play one of the parts. And that was a difficult task, because I didn't know anybody with a name. Well, I knew Jane Asher, but there was no part for Jane Asher. And I didn't know any British actors. But I was watching at that time on the television, that was this great serial,
Brideshead Revisited.
Revisited. And I was in you know, Jeremy Irons was playing the main part. And I thought, this guy, this actor, had such a great expression on his face and in his eyes, that he can play the part with practically without dialogue. He can play just. So I was asking my friends, who knows the phone number for Jeremy Irons? And luckily somebody knew the number. I dialed the number, I said, the voice answered, and I said, here I am, I don't know if you know my name, but I am filmmaker from Poland. He said, I know your name. And I started to tell him, well, look, I have this idea about making this movie about what is happening right now, the martial law in Poland. And he said, where do you live? I said, in Kensington, De Vere Gardens. Okay, Jeremy said, I'll be there in half an hour. He came, and I put the liter of the Polish vodka, 2 glasses, I poured them, and neither him nor me were vodka drinkers, but we drank it and we talked. And after an hour, Jeremy called his agent and said, look, don't scream, but I would like to make this little movie here with Skolimowski. Okay, I know. Okay, he hung up and he told me, look, I am committed to play the main part in a very important film called Betrayal. It was Harold Pinter's script, and the producer, the famous one, what's his name? Because I forgot it all.
Sam Spiegel.
Sam Spiegel, you know, one of the most famous of the time. And Jeremy said, and I am committed to start this film on the 20th of January, and we were talking at the end of December, like maybe it was the 26th, 27th. So he said, I can do anything you want, but only until the 19th of January. After that, Sam Spiegel will not give you 5 minutes of my time. No way. So I said, fine, let me try. And having promised to have a half of the budget, and having chance to work with Jeremy Irons, next day, I took my tennis racket and I went to the Baron's Court. Does it still exist? There were kind of snobbish tennis courts where rich people used to play. And I thought maybe I will be lucky and see somebody whom I know. And I was lucky. I spot Michael White playing on one of the courts, and I waited until he finished. And I asked Michael, maybe one set with me, and he liked to play with me because he was easily beating me. So he said, okay, one set I can do. And Michael White, if you are not familiar with this name, he was a famous theater producer, but also a film producer as well. But all the big shows on the Shaftesbury Avenue, there were his big hits, you know, of that time. So I started to play with Michael, and he was easily beating me. But every time we were changing the sides, after 1-0, then 3-0, then 5-0, I was dropping a line. I said, I'm going to start a movie soon. Good, he said. Then another exchange, and he said, yes, and who is financing it? I said, Channel 4. Oh, very good, this is solid money. Yes, okay. And another exchange, and do you have an actor? Yes, I have Jeremy Irons. Oh, that's really great. And then I start to play the best tennis in my life to reach another exchange, you know, to drop another piece of information. So I got into 5-3, and we were changing the sides. And where we were passing, and I thought, what can I say? Suddenly he took the voice and said, hey, let's stop playing this silly game and let's talk business. So we went into the cafe, and he said, well, he asked me several questions, and half an hour later, he signed the check for £500,000. So I had the budget, and I had Jeremy for 19 days, including all Saturdays and Sundays, non-stop, from the 1st of January until the 19th of January, which made this film, of which you are going to see a little piece now.
I'm not afraid. I'm quite calm. The thing is, I've not had a clear thought in my head since yesterday. Banned a wide range of civil liberties. A 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. curfew was introduced. Polish soldiers patrolled the streets of Warsaw in battle gear. Telephone and telex lines with the outside world were all cut yesterday. They sleep soundly. They don't know. Let them sleep. Two for Banaszak. He likes his coffee strong.
Wódka. Wódka. Wódka.
I say, have you seen the news in the paper?
Please go in.
It must be extremely upsetting to you what's happening in Poland.
Yes, it is very upsetting. Yes, go in. Look at it.
I to explain.
Why?
There's too much on there, pal. Get some of it off.
It's not my rubbish.
You paid £40 for one load, not for 6 loads. Get some of it off.
But it was the people, it was the neighbors here.
I'm the geezer driving the wagon. I'll go up the road, I'll get nicked. Get it off. I've had enough of you people.
It was the people, I was shaving, I looked out the window, it was here. It's not my rubbish.
And the guy with the turn-up nose next to Jeremy in the last moments, it was Genio Haczkiewicz, the guy whom I put...
Oh!
I am not surprised by your question, but I would like to point out that we are here to talk about my work as a director mostly, not as a scriptwriter. But of course, no, we have written the script for Roman. It was a trio, Roman, myself, and Eva. We were working in the spring of last year, and the film was shot in the summer of last year, and it's now practically ready, and hopefully will be released this year. Let's hope that it will be soon. So you will have all the answers when you see this film. It's a huge irony about people, about society, about privileges. It's nearly satire. It's quite funny, but not ha 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 funny, but discreet, intelligent, black humor is present there. Well, Tesla, was one of those unborn children. We had a pretty good script. We couldn't find the financing because it was expensive, expensive film. And that was the period when no one would risk on my name, you know, several millions in whatever currency it was. And eventually, my co-author of this film, who meantime became a filmmaker himself, made a film about Tesla, not of our script, but a kind of cheaper version of what was happening with Nikola Tesla. He was a very special character, deserving the film. I haven't seen it yet, but you can look at the internet, I guess it's available there. Michael Almareda is the name of my co-writer who made this film. And since Michael is a very talented man, was very talented, and I believe still is, I guess it may be a very interesting movie. I didn't have a choice, you know, since I said that I am not going to make romantic comedies in Poland, that I am only interested in making films which are really engaged in serious matters, and I was not allowed to do that. I have to try to find some other way for living, for making movies, and I took that risk, and believe me, it wasn't easy. It was just the opposite. It was very, very, very difficult to decide to go into totally unknown future. And I start having a kind of gypsy life, moving from one country to the other, returning to England a couple of times, and it was very, very difficult to get some project on the floor. Not always I was so lucky, like with Moonlighting, you know. That was miracle what had happened with Channel 4 and Michael White. It doesn't happen every day with every project. I had several projects which I couldn't make. Tesla was one of them. It was a constant fight, you know, to make living. I had a family. I had two young sons, and that was very, very difficult period of life.
And with that answer, you have completely justified the title of the retrospective, Outsiders and Exile, so it's a really perfect thing to end on. Thank you so much, Jerzy Skolimowski, for being here, for all the wonderful films that we'll be showing over the next month or so. And thank you, Eva, for being actually very, very useful indeed, it turned out. And thank you all for coming.